Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In this session, we will go through an example of two-dimensional array. We have the following scenario. It says, consider a course that has 4 sections. In each section, we have 10 students. We have to use the space below to write a Java program that will read the marks of each student in each section and store them in two-dimensional array. The size of the array should be 4 rows by 10 columns. For each row, where each row represents a section and each column represents a student. Your program should output the number of failed students with mark below 50 in each section. And we have an example here. For example, if the users enter the following marks, so we have 4 sections, so these are the sections, and here we have the students' mark. So for example, in the first section, we have 99.5, 70.5, and similarly, the exercise says we have to go through the first section and we have to find how many of them they fail if their mark is below 50. So here, for example, we have this is 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's why the message we have to output as number of failed students in section 1 equal 4. Similarly, we have to go to the second row. We have no such number which is below 50. So we will mention that number of students in section 2 equal 0. So we can think about this exercise as follows. The first thing is we have to define the following array, and this array should be of size 4 by 10, so 4 rows and 10 columns. The data type of this two-dimensional array should be double because we will need to store floating point numbers like 44.5, 80.6, and so on. Once the declaration is done, we will have to ask the user to enter the values of the array. We save them. And then we have to go for each row. For each row, we have to output how many students they fail. So in this case, we have to do something similar to this. We have to say, let's go and go through the following or through this row, for example. And this is actually, we know that always the first row in any array is located at location 0. So we will just go to row 0 and we will go and check all the elements we have in row 0. And because at the end we have to output how many of them fail, this means we have to declare a variable just like counter. For example, we call it count or number of fail, and then we keep counting. So within the current row, which is row 0, we have to go and check for each element if it is below 50. So in our case, we will find this is 1. So we will increment counter. Initially, it should be 0, so it will be incremented as 1. And then this is the other one. So this will be as 2. And then again, we should have this is the third one. And finally, this is number 4. Once we finish the element, we have to output a message saying number of failed students in section. And notice that here they say in section 1. So if you are in row 0, and usually we use the loop with I equals 0, we have to output that this is section 1. So basically what we will mention, we will say at location I plus 1. And here 4 represents the count, how many students they fail, which is exactly the same number we have over there. And then similarly, we will go to the second row, third row, till we finish all the elements in our array. The coding now we will do is as follows. Always we start with the import with the public class, a static void main, and because we need reading, so we will have a scanner as well. Now next step is declaring the array. So we need to have the following. We will say double grade, 2 brackets, and then we have to mention that this is a double because we are expecting marks. The first number 4, which means 4 row, and the second number 10, which means 10 columns. So out of this statement, we are declaring something similar to this array. I'm having 4 rows, 10 columns. The first row always starts from 0, so we have 0, 1, 2, 3. The first column also starts from 0, so from 0 up to 9. Now we need to go and we have to fill our array. So we have to ask the user for values, and then we have to read these values and save them in our array. Because we have two-dimensional array, which means I have to have two for loops for each row, for each column, and then we will keep reading the values. So the second piece of code, it should be, I have the first for loop from I0, I up to grades.length, I plus plus. If you recall from a previous session, this is the loop that we have to use to go for each element in our array. This is for each row. And then we have to ask the user, please enter marks. And then to go for each column, we have to use another loop for j equals 0, j less than grades of I dot length, j plus plus. So this will go for each column we have. So what we did, we are doing something similar to this. I'm having I will go for each row, and we have j, and j will go for each column. And that's why I will start from 0, and also j will start from 0. I should go up to grades.length. This is number of rows. This is 4. J should go up to grades of I.length. This is the number of columns, which is 10. Now, for once you have I and J, for example, I0 and J0, which means we are currently in this location, the first cell, read the value and save it in location I and J. So if the user says, for example, the value is 10, so basically 10 will be saved in this location. And similarly, you will read all the values of the two-dimensional array, exactly just like what we explained in the previous session. Now, just like we are reading the value, we will save them in our array. So let's assume the data entered was as follows. Now, our next step is I have to go and I have to check for each row what are the marks that are below 50, and then we have to output a message. And as we agreed, we will have a loop for each row, a loop for each column, and we have a counter that will do the counting for each row. So the next piece of code, we will have it as follows. We will start by saying, let's have integer I equals 0, I less than grades.length, and I plus plus, which means now I'm using I for each row, which means the first time we are dealing with this, we will have I as located at location 0. Now the second step, as we will mention, go and declare a variable count equals 0. So I have here a variable count and the initial value as 0, which means when we started the first row, we have a new variable count and the initial value is 0 to keep counting the values below 50. Now the second thing I'm saying, for each j from 0 up to the end of the column, j plus plus. So I'm saying j should be representing the column there, and we will start from 0 and then we will move till the end of the columns we have. So the first time, when we enter the inner loop, we will have I0 and J0. The condition, it says go and check for elements below 50. So what we have to go, and we have to go to check the element inside I and J. So we will have to mention grades, location I, location J, is it below 50? Just remember, if you have a statement that says, for example, only grades below 50, this is not accepted, because grades is a two-dimensional array, so I have to mention which row, which column. Also, if you write a statement like this, grades location I only below 50, again, this is not accepted because I need for a specific cell and J and column. So always we need to specify I and J. So whenever you mention the name of the array, two brackets I and J, it means the value inside. So the first time you will say 45, is it less than 50? True. So we have to increment count. So the value of the counter here will be the value 1. Now we are still within the boundary of the inner loop. So still I'm having to execute the statement, and then we will go back for the second J. So J now will be moving to location 1. And then similarly, go and check the element in this cell, is it below 50? The current element is 70.5. 70.5, is it below 50? It's not. So we will not increment count. And then we will go back to the next J. So we will go to location 2 and still the value of count as 1. And similarly, you will be moving with J. So here you will have to check 70 and the count will not be changed. 78, again, the count will not be changed. When you reach the value, or when you reach J as 4, so the value will be 10. 10 is at less than 50, true, so increment count, so the value of the count will be as 2. And then similarly go with the other values. We have 90, 75, 99, 87, 71. And this will be the end of the J. Once you finish all the columns, once you finish all the values you have, then you will come to this statement. Now what we did actually, we went through all the elements in our first row. So we just have moved in this way and all of these elements have been checked. Just before we go to I1, just before we go to I1, which means the second row, I have to display a message. And that's why you will notice that this message is just before we go to the second element we have. So here it says, output number of failed students in section I plus 1 equal the number of count. So the first time we will have a message that says number of failed students and section, and I have section I plus 1, current I is 0, I plus 1 as 1, and then equal count, the current count we have it as is 2, which means in this row we found 2 students, their marks below 50. What we did so far, it's only for one row. So now our next step is go and check the second row. And that's why we have the loop for the I. So that's why we have to go to the second I. And this means now go and change your I, so I will not be there. I will be moving, or I will be having the value as 1. Now once you move your I to the second row, again you have to say count equals 0. So again this variable will be created. We have this variable, and this variable will have the initial value as 0. Why this is important, that whenever we move to a new row, the count should be 0. Because if by mistake this was actually not within the row, this actually was before the loop, it means the first time we will have I0, we will do the counting and we will end up with counting 2. Once we move I with the second row, I equals 1, count will not start with a fresh value which is 0, count will continue from the old value. So it will say, go and calculate, do you have any number below 50? It's not in this row. Okay, what is the value of the count? The value of the count is 2. So again it will say number of failed students in section 2 also 2. But this is not true, because if you notice here in current row, in the row number 1, we don't have any failed students. And that's why if you don't clear your counter, it will always count up on the old values, and that's why we need the count to be declared, initialized for each row. So what we did now, we are moving to the second row. So this is I location 1, and then we have, as we agreed, this is the J, and it will be moving for each element in the column, and it will check the value. If it is below 50, then it will increment the count. So we are starting count as 0, and we will double check. So we have 90, 87, 76, 97, 67, 97, 65, 98, 76, 87. None of them is below 0, which means we will finish the loop of the J and still the value of the count is 0. So when you finish J, and then you have to execute this statement, number of failed students in this section equal count. So we will have to say here number of failed students, and section 2 equal, what is the value of the count? The count is still initialized to 0, so here we have it as 0 because in this row none of the marks was below 50. And similarly you will go to I equal 2, I equal 3, and each time you have to do the calculation and do the counting. So here what we did in this example we did the following. The first thing, we needed an array of size 4 by 10, and that's why we mentioned that we should have double grades and then the size will be 4 and 10, which means 4 rows and 10 columns. The second step was reading the values. Reading the values of two-dimensional array, it means we have to read the values and I have to go for each row. That's why we need the I loop. We need for each column. That's why we need the J loop. The third step, go and find which one is below 50 in each element. So again, I have to go for each row and I have to go for each column and I have to check the element inside my array, is it below 50? If it is below 50, we have to do counting, and that's why we started by saying count equals 0. And if we have the case of below 50, we increment count. As we mentioned, one small thing, always remember that count should be initialized for each row, otherwise you will not have the correct output. And then just before you go to the second row, just output the elements you have. Now let's do a small modification. For example, let's assume we need to do the counting of numbers below 50, and also we need to output these numbers which are below 50. So just the same code we have, we can just simply go there and we say this condition will check if the number is below 50. So what I have to do, we have to increment count. One more thing is I have to display. So I have to say here, I need system.out.println, and I will display the number. So I will display grades at location I, location J. These two statements should be within the if condition. So I have to open a brackets here and close a bracket over there. So whenever we have a number below 50, we'll increment count and also display the number we found. So this was an exercise of two-dimensional array.